Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy Tuesday. It is going to be a little chillier than yesterday, but still overall a nice day. Currently 44 degrees, going to be high 52. Partly cloudy today. 7:43 is the sunset, and 5:51 is the sunrise. I know I went backwards there, but my eye caught my note on the sunset first. So, um, but still another nice day. And so this week, we started looking at a study in um, reaping and sowing, or sowing and reaping, and looking at the heart behind the sower and what comes back to them, right? What comes back to them and what they sow, right? What they sow. And we started with John chapter 1, and we saw Nathaniel. He questioned, but he still had a open heart, willing to go look and see for himself, right? And Jesus um, described him as a man with no guile in his heart, an Israelite with no guile or no deceit in his heart. And so, that idea of wanting to know for yourself doesn't necessarily mean that there's something bad in your heart. It just means you want to know. It means you're not necessarily going to believe somebody else, right? You're going to go see for yourself. That's what Philip said. Come see for yourself. Let's go find out for yourself, right? And so Jesus referred to him as a man with no guile in his heart. Um, then we looked at a little verse in Job and a couple Proverbs, and but so today I want to start with 1 Kings chapter 8. 1 Kings chapter 8. And let's just pick up in verse 15. So Solomon is starting to speak to the people Israel after he finished building the temple. Okay, and so he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his hand has fulfilled what he promised with his mouth to my father, to David my father, saying, since the day that I brought my people out of Israel out of Egypt, I chose no city out of the tribes of Israel in which to build a house, that my name might be there. But I chose David to be over my people Israel." Now God chose him, right? Now let's look at this a little bit more. It says in verse 17, "Now it was in the heart of David my father to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel." Okay, so what's in his heart? Well, his heart is after the Lord, and therefore the Lord chose David, right? It says, chose David to be over my people Israel. Because he had, now it was in the heart of my father to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to David my father, whereas it was in your heart to build a house for my name, you did well that it was in your heart. Nevertheless, you shall not build a house, but your son, who shall be born to you, shall build the house for my name. Okay. So, and Solomon fulfills that and builds the house for his name. Okay. So, the heart, what was in the heart of David, right? It was to build the house, even though he couldn't, even though he didn't. God didn't let him. He was a man of war, right? He was a man of war, and so and because of that, God couldn't let him build the house, or wouldn't let him build the house. His son needed to, who was a king of peace for the most part, except for what was in his heart, right? So it's there's a lesson in that too. Careful that we don't judge somebody based on their warring, right? What's in their heart. Now, David, being a great warrior, had the mind of God in his heart, right? And Solomon, we come to find out, he had the mind of women on his heart. Okay, and so he gave over. He essentially gave over his entire promise of sitting on the throne of gave over not just his promise but David's promise for women. Right, that was his curse. So, what is in our heart? Right, what is in our heart? And because that was in his heart, right, God gave him um, the throne, and he gave his sons the throne. He says, "Nevertheless, you shall not build a house, but your son who will be born to you shall build the house for my name. Now the Lord has fulfilled his promise that he made, for I have risen in the place of David my father and sit on the throne of Israel as the Lord promised. I have built a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel." Now, another part of that is God said that he would always keep the somebody from David on the throne, and he does, and he does. Okay, and actually, when God goes to strip the kingdom from Solomon and from that line, he keeps one tribe or and one city there in David, and that's Judah. All the rest he gives to, now I might get it mixed up, Rehoboam, and no, Rehoboam was Solomon's son. Jeroboam was the person that was from the servant and gave him the other 10 tribes, right? And he did bad too. Furthermore, anyway. So back to reaping and sowing. The Kings and the Chronicles and first, the Samuel. That's one of my favorite sections. It's a good section of scripture. Um, so Proverbs, right? So we saw in Proverbs what what happens, right? What happens? So Proverbs 6:14, and actually 12, starting 12. A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech, winks his eyes, signals with his feet, with his finger, with perverted heart, devises evil, continually sowing discord. So, what's in the heart affects what we sow. And we continually sow discord, right? Continually sow discord. So let's flip over to Proverbs 22. Let's go to 22 and verse 8. 22 and verse 8. Whoever sows injustice will reap calamity, and the rod of his fury will fail. And the rod of his fury will fail. So, look, what if we sow injustice, right? Unbalanced scales, right? Unbalanced scales. Now, when we do that, right, the rod of his fury, the so the rod we'll say is the scale, right? The fury is what's in our heart that makes us want to take advantage of or be unjust, unfair, you know, to do what is not right, right? To keep pushing down somebody so we can elevate ourselves, right? Well, fury, right? Fury, and it will fail. It says so. Whoever sows injustice will reap calamity. If I do that, I'm going to bring calamity onto myself, right? I'm going to bring calamity onto myself. So when we sow in injustice, when there's injustice in our heart and we sow that, we're going to bring calamity onto ourselves. Proverbs 26. Proverbs 26 and verse 18. He says, like a madman who throws fire bands, arrows, and death is a man who deceives his neighbor and says, I am only joking. Well, like a madman who throws fire bands, arrows, and death. So what am I sowing? Right? fire bands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I am only joking. Ooh. Do you ever know anybody like that who's always doing something and then plays it off like as it's a joke, right? Well, what's in their heart? Right? What's in their heart? Deception, right? Deception. Man, that's a proverb for you right there. That's a maxim. So, what are we projecting, right? What are we projecting? Because what we project tells everything about what's in our heart, right? It tells everything about what's in our heart. And now, going back to David, don't be, if somebody is seeming as a man of war. Now, remember with David, it was coming at him, right? It was coming at him. In all these proverbs, it's what are we putting out there, right? Injustice. Um, you know, when we put out injustice, we return calamity, right? When we put out injustice, we return calamity. Here, if what are we throwing out? If we're sowing, we're throwing out. He throws fire bands, arrows, and death. Is the man who deceives his neighbor, right? So when we walk in deception, right? We walk in deception and try to say I'm only joking, but we throw these things out. We're madmen, right? Madmen. All right, let's turn to Hosea. Hosea and chapter 8. Okay, so Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea. Hosea chapter 8. Let's look at. Now let's pick up in verse 6. For it is from Israel, a craftsman made it. It is not God. The calf of Samaria shall be broken to pieces. For they sow the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. The standing grain has no heads. It shall yield no flour. If it were to yield, strangers would devour it. Ooh. So, for they sow the wind, idols. Okay, idols. For it is from Israel, so people. A craftsman made it, not God. Right? A craftsman made it, not God. The calf of Samaria. So, going back to the kings, Jeroboam, he created two calves in his 10 tribes, not wanting to let the people go down to Judah to sacrifice properly because he was scared of losing the people, and they would go back to Judah. Okay, so here we have from Israel, right, made by a craftsman, not by God, a calf, right, a calf. Then it says, for they sow the wind, right? Who's they in this? And they shall reap the whirlwind. Hold on. The standing grain has no heads. It shall yield no flour. If it were to yield, strangers would devour it. Okay? So the standing grain has no heads. It shall yield no flour. So, who's they? Right? Who's they? Idolaters, right? Idolaters. For they sow the wind. Fakeness, right? They sow fakeness. And what happens when we sow fakeness? It says we reap the whirlwind. We reap the whirlwind. Right? Because grain should have flour. Right? And what do you yield? Nothing. You don't yield what you're supposed to. Right? When we sow the wind, when we sow idolatrous things, when we sow things that are not of God, right? What do we reap? The whirlwind. We reap the whirlwind. and the standing grain has no heads, it shall yield no flour. If it were to yield, strangers would devour it. Those that are not of God come to that. Yeah. So what are you putting out there? What am I putting out there? Do I put out there that which a stranger wants, or that which the people of God want to eat? All right, y'all. This has been a good study for me. I hope it's good for you.